Hello. In this video I'm going to speak about reading. And reading is something we mostly all do at a daily basis. We read books, magazines, articles on the internet, different things. And when we read in our own languages, we're normally not interested in learning about our language. We're interested in some special subject, or maybe we just read for entertainment. Advanced language learners will do the same thing. And it is important to do this because you need, as a language learner, also to learn how to read with a certain momentum, like a bulldozer traveling through vast amounts of language without being stopped by every little pothole on the road. And the only way to achieve that is to train that, and you do that by reading. Reading and reading. There are two kinds of reading. This kind I just described is called extensive reading, because you don't learn it for the details of the language. You may learn some words, but then it will mostly be words from that special subject you are studying. Then there is another way, that's the intensive reading. Intensive reading is done of small amounts of text, but then you read those small texts very thoroughly. You study them. You may even copy them by hand. You look up words. You can use translations to ease your way through the text if necessary. Large amount of text and fairly quick reading, that's extensive reading. Slow study, slow reading on small amounts of text, that's intensive reading. Even a native speaker may sometimes read intensively. Well, difficult poems, for instance, or laws, or mathematical proofs, or postcards. They have handwritings that can be more or less easy to read, and if you don't know the style yet, you may have to study. You may have to read very slowly, considering every word. Another case. This is a book from 1949. It is printed with Gothic letters, Fraktur. It is til Eulenspiegel, which is known because Richard Strauss wrote a tone poem about it. So, even a native speaker will sometimes do intensive study or reading. On the other hand, most language learners will prefer to read extensively as soon as they have the possibility. There is an important notion here. A man called Christian. In many respects he was a fanatic who believed that you only should learn languages through materials in the target language itself. And I don't see any reason for that. I use bilingual dictionary grammars written in other languages. I use translations, and I do translations. So I don't subscribe to his theories there. I also read grammars. Grammars are fun, but he made one important addition to our vocabulary. He invented the notion of comprehensible input, which means input which you almost can understand. Not quite, but almost. And sometimes it is given as percentages, 5–10% unknown material in a text, then it's comprehensible. But it's really nonsense to speak about percentages here, because what do you count? The number of words unknown? The space they occupy, or is it just like saying a 9 out of 10 on some mental scale? But you know it when you have it. A text that is just below what you can read, and where you have to guess the rest. I don't believe much in guessing, so I don't believe much in learning your languages through comprehensible input, but it is important for several reasons. One is, as I said, you have to learn to read like a bulldozer. You have to gain momentum while you read, and not be blocked by every little detail that is unknown. The other thing is more concrete. If you take a list of idiomatic expressions in a language, you'll find that most of those are exceedingly rare. They are known by native speakers, but look up an expression and then read and read and read and wait until you find it in a book. It can take years. So, in order to learn idiomatic expressions and style in general, you need to get through a lot of material. You also need to get through that material in order to consolidate the words you have learned through your intensive study. So, it's important. If we just regard what happens during intensive study, I will mention two elements. One is, of course, the use of dictionaries. The other is the use of translations. If you have a sentence that is difficult because you don't know the language, then a good idea is to look up the words before you try to understand the sentence. It's easier to understand a sentence if you know the words, that's clear. You may find you need even more words, then look them up too. I have shown several times in other videos my format for intensive reading and studying, where I copy text and I write new words in the margin, and later I transfer them to word lists. As far as possible, you should look those words up before you try to understand a certain sentence. The same thing with translations. There are literary translations, as I call them. There are machine translations. Those made by the persons are not made for you as a language learner. They are made for people who don't intend to read or need original text. You can read the translation first and use that as an inspiration while you try to decode yourself the foreign text. And afterwards you can use it as a control. It won't serve you as a guide word for word to understand the text. What you have to understand of that foreign text is something you should understand on its own premises, but with help. Exactly the same technique can be used to push a text from incomprehensible to comprehensible. And sometimes it's not very much, just a few words or things like that. But it takes time to look words up in a dictionary, and sometimes it's easier just to have a translation. It may give you just that little push that makes it possible for you to understand the foreign text. And then it has suddenly become comprehensible input. Okay. The purpose of extensive reading is different from the purpose of intensive reading. But if a text isn't comprehensible, then it is legitimate and it's even a good idea to use sources, whatever source that can push that text up to the realm of comprehensible input. Everything that can make something comprehensible that wasn't comprehensible before must be good for you. I personally say normally that I don't learn words through extensive reading. That's not totally true, because I learn specialist language. For instance, if I want to learn about Icelandic bird names, I have got a book here. That's a bird guide in Icelandic. I can learn what plumage is called in Icelandic and things like that. But I don't learn much general vocabulary through extensive reading. I learned that through my intensive studies. I use dictionaries and I use other sources, and most of those sources are bilingual. I'm not in quite the opposite camp of Krashen on that point. But his notion of comprehensible input is also useful for me with my views. Goodbye.